And you've just heard The Yellow Clock, taken from Jim Byrne's EP, Four Country and Folk Songs. And I'm delighted to be joined by Jim now. Hello, Jim.
Hi, Alistair. How you doing?
I'm well. Good to see you.
Yeah,
so
same for yourself.
Can you talk us through the four songs on the EP? Because
Sure.
they're quite distinct.
Yeah, well, I'll just sort of preface it a wee bit by saying that this whole EP thing came out slightly by accident, simply because Warren from Foxstar Records just phoned me at a particular time when I was putting four songs in a folder on my computer. He asked me to send me them, and phoned me back within the hour and says, "Oh, I'd love to put these out. I really like these songs. These are great." So it kind of came out of the blue, and the songs have been written maybe over the last couple of years. The Yellow Clock probably comes from the passing of my mum and dad, although they haven't passed, in the last couple of years, but I can't remember. Timelines are terrible for me. It's probably been about 6 years since my dad passed, and then my mum passed a couple of years before that. And I think just that whole mindset changes. I did write some songs from both my mum and my dad at the time, but I think it just puts you in the mindset of placing yourself in the timeline of you and your mum and dad and their mum and dad before it, and suddenly you can see yourself in this timeline of passing through the world. So that song is a wee bit about that. It's basically a daughter coming back from her mother's funeral, and as she sits there, she observes the memories in the room. Well, the yellow clock, the ticking of time.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of basic idea. I don't think it's necessarily it's not a depressing song when you listen to it. I don't think you necessarily even get that right away. It's a kind of quite a folky, 60s kind of folky sounding song, yeah. I think. I don't know what you think yourself, Master, but it's got that kind of singer-songwriter from the 60s feel in my head. But when you kind of unravel what's going on, I suppose it's about that, The second song on it is much more upbeat. It's more kind of Hank Williams kind of traditional country, with a bit of, I don't know, New Orleans and Cajun style groove to it. And that really just comes from my love of that kind of music, and also love of, I quite like the sound of the accordion. I've always listened to a lot of Cajun music. We used to listen to a lot of it in the car, so it's several sort of compilation albums of this real strange mix between rock and roll and Cajun and kind of country. Yeah. So it just kind of springs from these things in the mix. The song itself is about the tension between the person you're with and that you love, and all the temptations that are out there that that can come along every now and again. So I'm sure probably everybody can relate to that. Mm-hmm. So that's what, that's a kind of traditional sounding country song in some sense. The third one, which is the one about what's it called again? Maybe you can tell me. I can never remember the names of any songs.
I will tell you. It's the one with the devil.
Yeah, it is the one with the devil.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They tell the devil I stole his crown of pain, which I thought was the most kind of country sounding, that almost kind of very typical,
Yeah,
what they say,
that's true.
My father drowned in the fountain at Lourdes, that kind of thing.
That's right. It's definitely got a country name, but it's probably springs much more from a folk tradition, or a folk country tradition. It's this kind of tradition of what they call murder ballads.
Yes.
I don't know if you're aware of these, that tradition of song, which is a kind of misogynistic type of narrative where often a strange man turns up and the woman becomes kind of besotted and he takes her away. And most of the time there's a sorry end to that story. Yeah. And I think that tradition of song exists in quite a few countries. It certainly exists in kind of English folk and Scottish
ballads. Yeah,
Scottish ballad, yeah.
Scottish ballad have been taken away and there's consequences, yeah.
Yeah, there is a kind of parallel type of song which doesn't necessarily have the kind of dark ending, which is the minstrel coming through the town, and wooing the local woman who is usually married, and they go away together and sort of have adventures. So there's a kind of that element of it, It's not exactly a murder ballad, and as much as I try not to paint pictures too precisely, so you don't know exactly what's going on. So you kind of decide that for yourself. You know something's not, whatever's going on is not that good. You know that. I think you get that impression. It's not that good. This person is apparently rescuing this woman from something, but his intentions are not absolutely good. So that's the third song, and it's got quite I mean, it clearly sounds like some kind of country song, but it's got that kind of dark, folky element to it, which I think is probably drawn from both Scottish and English folk traditions. Maybe the 1960s again crops up, sorts of folk that were the British folk guys and girls who were influenced by American music.
Yeah.
So they had that strange mix. So I'm the sort of further down the road,
Yeah,
drawing both
Richard
from them.
Thompson, that whole kind of.
Yeah, that's exactly. John Martin as well is in there. You know, that kind of group of folk who were drawing from American music, but it ended up quite a distinctive sort of sound. So to say, I'm in that lineage there with that kind of song. The last song, what's the last song about? Yeah,
Holy Ghost, yes, which is
the Holy Ghost.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, again, there's slight differences in the style of all of these songs. They're drawn from the same pool broadly, but this one's more kind of electric driven and drums. And again, it's a relationship, and religion is in there somewhere. So what I've been told from people that tell me what it's about is it's a kind of forbidden love. These two people meet in a church and they're looking at each other, but the powers to be, or the religious sort of powers, don't agree with this match, which is a story that I wasn't aware of, because that's not that's not what was in my head when I wrote it.
Right.
But that seems to be the common interpretation of it. My own sort of interpretation was more that something, again, slightly bad was going on here, and that the male was the perpetrator of that slightly bad thing, and the church was kind of supporting him.
Yeah.
And hiding it in some way. But as I say, the words themselves do not lay all that out explicitly. So people can interpret it in whatever way they like, and they have interpreted it in that way of it's a love. There's these people have got a love and they want to get together, and they're being prevented by the powers. So that's fair enough. As I say, the story's not laid out.
Are you often surprised at the reactions that your songs get, that when you put them out there, someone will come up and say, "Oh, that was amazing, that was this," and you say, well,
yeah, absolutely. Most of the time.
Yeah.
Most of the time people tell you what a song's about. It's news to me, but I like that. I mean, I would never say, no, that's not what it's about, because that clearly is what it's about for that person. And people do make up a huge amount of backstory, and from very limited numbers of words. These songs have very few words in them, so they weave the story from having listened to it. And if people will say to you things like, it's a shame that person died. I said, what person in your song? Such and said, did they? Yeah, you said in the story that. So I don't. Is that right? Okay, I'll need to revisit those lyrics. So that kind of thing. People tell you things, you think, well, good that you've got all that from it. Your imagination has been engaged.
But I guess it's like I've spoken to a lot of writers who say, once the book is out there, it's however the reader interprets it.
Yeah, exactly.
They're not going to say this is the way you must read it, because you just
read
it. And
absolutely.
Your songs do tend to tell stories as well. That's the kind of tradition that seems to me that you're in.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Although there is it's strange. I have had a slight experience where I've been up against people who are Nashville writers. I don't know if you know anything about that world of songwriting, but it's a much more claustrophobic interpretation of song,
right,
where everything's got to be explicit.
Right.
If you're telling a story, it does have to have a middle, it does have to have a sort of development, and it has to have a very clear ending. and it should be very clear what's happening here and who these people are.
It's interesting.
And my songwriting is kind of the opposite of that. It's still storytelling.
Yeah.
Much of the time it's unresolved. You don't know exactly what's going on. So I've told people this story before, and I probably shouldn't overplay it too much, but I did send the second song, what's the second song called?
Yeah, Heart of Mine is a blind fool.
Yeah, this Heart of Mine is a blind fool. I did actually send that to try and get it covered because I thought it was the type of song that could be covered by a sort of real country singer. And I did not get a positive response for various reasons. Some of them were to do with the that it wasn't family friendly.
Right.
I don't know if you've read the lyrics, but
well, I'm trying to think, because you wouldn't think Nashville songs are necessarily family friendly, but maybe these days there's more to them than there used to be.
Yeah. No, what it was is I said it. One of the lines in the song says that I kissed something about I don't kiss the girls and I don't kiss the boys, which is a kind of throwaway line. It's a modern take, if you want. It's contemporary. Only a contemporary person might say that. So, and I'm fine with that. But it doesn't sort of occur to me as I write these lyrics, which are not really, I'm not constructing some kind of rigid song, where everything's got to be in its place. These are just the things that come out of your head and you put them on the paper, and it's to do with how it's being singable and the tune and all that sort of things. Clearly, because you live in the world you live in, these are the things that come out of your subconscious. So it hadn't occurred to me when I sent that song that somebody would pick up on that and see that as something that was impossible for somebody in Nashville to record. It's just beyond the pale.
It's interesting, yeah. I mean, I guess Nashville, almost like the Brill Building or like Motown or these, it's almost like it becomes a factory, a songwriting factory.
Yeah, it's a song factory.
Rules in that factory.
And there are quite tight rules. And I just did not fit into those rules very well. I wasn't aware of these rules. It's only in the last year or two I joined the Nashville Songwriters Association Glasgow branch, maybe a year and a bit ago. And before that, I really had no clue about that world. I just thought these are songwriters, and they do more of it there than they do here. There's a whole industry surrounding it there, but I did not know about the kind of the rules and regulations that sort of seem to come into play in a much kind of tighter way there than here. Your songs have really got to fit very well into a kind of template of what that type of song is, and if they don't fit into that template, they're really not that interested in it. So that was a bit of a surprise to me. But you learn something new. And they have some things to say which are useful because they give you a totally different perspective. And I think anybody who's involved in making things, whether it's writing, a novel, a poem, or a song, just seeing it from somebody else's perspective does help you to see your own work in a new light. You see it within a kind of wider context, I suppose. I think that's quite helpful.
No, definitely. But interesting that the reaction is not whether it's a good song or a bad song, just it's for technical reasons almost, we cannot use this.
Exactly.
Way of looking at it.
And they don't seem to have any kind of big thing about tunes. I like melody, and it's quite an old-fashioned thing, I suppose, melody, but they don't seem to even mention it. It's like, I think they don't say this is a good song, because what is a song to me? It's a mixture of the melody, the rhythm, and the words. They seem solely concentrating on the words. If the words are not good, it's not a good song.
Yeah,
it's okay, right?
It's very interesting, and the EP is called For Country and Folk Songs, and I think from your descriptions of them and from listening to them, both those things are in all of them, but to a different degree. Like I would say, the first one's more of a folk song, and then you've got these two more country. But it's great that you can bring in all your influences, and again, that might be something that folk go, if they're looking at strict boxes, oh,
Yeah.
that's not completely a country song, or that's not completely a folk song. But I think in this country, we do tend to blur the edges and combine things and try new things.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you. I mean, I don't think any of them really fit in any specific box. I think if you're like a folk aficionado, you know, and you were very concentrated on, you know, traditions of folk, you probably listen to them thinking, there's not really, Jim, that's not a folk song. I don't know why you think it's a folk song. It's not a folk song, you know, because it's such a mix. Because, you know, the first one, if you listen to the Yellow Clock, there's quite a large blues sort of influence, acoustic blues influence there, as well as a country and a folk influence, and even the way the rhythm of it. I mean, everybody thinks these things are these genres. They have a different view of what they are.
Yeah.
But often, for me in the past anyway, folk was kind of how it sounded, rather than the words. You know, just because when I hear a song, I tend to hear the music first.
Yeah.
And the melody, and how it sounded is to do with the instruments that are played. So if it's like a guitar, an acoustic guitar, and a vocal, and it sounds like a 60s folk song, because in the 60s they had acoustic guitar and a vocal. Yeah. And maybe, I don't know what else would be in the mix, but folk instruments, folk instrumentation, you know, and I think, well, that's folk music. Whereas maybe you go to a folk club and you've got the tradition of the soul singer standing up with no instrumentation, and they belt out, you know, something which is comes from a totally different tradition of just the vocal and the storytelling. So the song might have 10 verses, takes them 15 minutes to get through them, and that's folk music. It's that one person
No
putting
instrumentation,
out
stripped
no
right back.
instrumentation.
Yeah.
And that's the only thing that's folk music.
Yeah.
Nothing else is.
But I do think certainly with a lot of the music that's getting made today, you know, you're getting folk with some jazz or with some country, like I said, or rock even. There's been, you know, a kind of blurring of the boundaries and much more collaboration, which is great.
Yeah. No, it is good. It is good. I mean, I'll tell a wee story, just if you don't mind, for a wee second, which was quite funny. When I was maybe in 2008 was when I started playing kind of the acoustic guitar stuff. And then a few years after that, I started playing like the folk clubs, because I didn't really know, you know, where I could play this music. It wasn't really folk music that I was playing. It was just songs I was writing. And I played a gig up north, and it was quite a good night, you know. I played some covers, played some of my own stuff, you know, we had a good time. And then at the end of it, this guy came up to me and says, Jim, why don't you play stuff from your own background, your own town, your own sort of, and I says, well, what you mean, like wet, wet, wet? I come from Clybank. Is that what you mean? Which of course was a joke, and he knew I was being funny. But to me, there's something about the idea of, you know, somebody saying your own music, but your own music is what you grow up with, surely. You know, it's what was in the charts and was on the radio, and it tends not to be certainly somebody of my age, traditional Scottish folk music. You get a bit of that in the mix with all the other stuff,
of course,
that's on the radio. You get a bit of that, you know, you get a bit of that at school, you get a bit of that on the radio, but it's just a part of the mix. It's not your personal music in that sense. Whereas I think this guy was saying, you're denying your own music, Jim. Why don't you sing something from your own town? You know, it's kind of strange.
It's actually narrowing this. You know, you can bring in all sorts of influences, but what you're looking for is as wide a kind of scope as possible, rather than you're not allowed to do this because you're not from that postcode or something as crazy as that.
And it's difficult anyway to make a choice in these things. I mean, you're either writing. I mean, I just write what I write. I mean, you do have to make some choices. I mean, again, when you're young, maybe you can relate to this. When you're 16, 17, 13, 14, whatever, the stuff you love is the stuff that all your age group loves. And what you love is who you are and what you identify with. And certainly in the past, things out with that are rubbish. And you wouldn't be seen dead with one of those records. This is your music. And that, so if you start a band at 17, you will be playing the music that is your music.
Yeah.
And there's no deciding required.
Yeah.
So I played punk when I was 17. Punk was the thing.
Yeah.
I did not play sort of folk music or whatever else the world was.
Record hadn't quite.
Hank Williams records. And I'm sure like all the folk of that age, this was the only music worth playing.
Yeah.
It's the only music you could identify with. So although I'm saying you don't make a decision, as you get older, you do have to make some decisions because you're no longer really part of a scene.
Yeah.
You do have a sort of okay, who am I? What do I like? What naturally comes out of me when I write? And you have to base it around that. You're not part of any kind of impetus within you that I'm part of this group. I love this group. I hate everybody else.
But that's freeing as well, isn't it? It means that you can really discover what you like rather than.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was just reading a book by a really famous songwriter. God, what's his name? I'll describe a song and maybe you can tell me what it is. It's the guy up the pole fixing the telephone wire.
A lineman, Glenn Campbell.
Yeah, Glenn Campbell sang it, right? So the guy that wrote this book is the writer of that song and many other classics. God, I've lost the thread. What was I going to say? What was the example for? He was talking about this idea of your music and all that, and how the people looking back at music will always love and praise the people before them.
Yeah.
But the people the people, what was it they said? The people from that time won't praise the people who are praising them because they always think that music's shit.
Yeah.
They were the people making the good music, and then the people that came after them destroyed the music industry and destroyed the music. So but that just moves in time. Everybody's the same.
Everybody's the same, yeah.
So the new people, like we, as sort of punks, we might think when the rappers come along, the rap, there's no tune in it, or whatever. There's no energy, whatever. Yeah. So people tend to be like that. The new stuff's always rubbish. I try not to get into that bag, of course. I listen to a lot of new music.
Well, Jim, I'm afraid I'd love to talk to you for much longer than we normally would, but I'm afraid time's against us. But thanks so much for taking the time to have a chat. I really appreciate it. No
bother. Sorry if I blabbed on a bit too much there.
Not at all.
Caught up.
And this is Jim Byrne and the Holy Ghost.